Very good evening, everyone. Welcome to the lecture 5 of Professor H.D. Sankalia monthly lecture series on Jain heritage. Today, to deliver the lecture 5 of Professor H.D. Sankalia monthly lecture series on Jain heritage, we have with us Dr. Kanika Kishore Saxena ma'am, who will be talking on the topic Kankali Tila past and present. Now, for those who are joining us for the first time, may I introduce the chair and its activities and the Professor H.D. Sankalia monthly lecture series for all of you. Bhagwan Sheetalnath Chair for Jain Archaeology has been established at the Department of Ancient Indian History, Culture and Archaeology, Deccan College Postgraduate and Research Institute, for the dissemination of knowledge, information, and data related to Jain heritages, Jain archaeological sites, specifically Jain art, architecture, archaeology, and other related aspects of Jainism. With the same aspect, we are also running a certificate course in Jain art and archaeology. An internship program is also going on. There are multiple projects which are also going on, and we also had a national seminar, a national workshop, and there are some other activities which are in the pipeline. Professor H.D. Sankalia, before there was a time period when the scholars usually used to ignore the fact that Jainism had its archaeological presence in the region of Deccan or specifically in the state of Maharashtra before some period of time. But because of the discovery of the Pali cave inscription by Professor H.D. Sankalia and Dr. Shobna Gokhale in the 1970s, it was well established that Jainism had its archaeological presence in the region of Maharashtra, Deccan, in at least as long as second century BCE. Because of his efforts, we are uh, here to tell us that it showed us that a lot of archaeological data further needs to be explored in the region of Deccan and Maharashtra and overall India. That's why this series has been named as Dr. Professor H.D. Sankalia Monthly Lecture Series. So, without further delay, I request Dhananjay Khandari, the research assistant of Bhagwan Sheetalnath Chair for Jain Archaeology, to give an introduction of our today's speaker, Dr. Kanika Kishore Saxena.
Good evening, everyone. Uh, Dr. Kanika Kishore Saxena is an assistant professor of history at Lady Shri Ram College, Delhi, specializing in ancient Indian history. Her research interest encompasses religion, art, and inscriptions. Dr. Saxena earned both her BA and MA degrees from Lady Shri Ram College, achieving first position in Delhi University for her MA and receiving the President's Gold Medal for her outstanding achievements in academics, conduct, character, and co-curricular and social services. She has presented her research at numerous national and international seminars, and her work has been published in esteemed peer-reviewed journals, including the Indian Historical Review, Social Scientist, and Art of the Orient. Her recent book, Before Krishna, Religious Diversity in Ancient Mathura, 2021, is published by Oxford University Press. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dhananjay Bhaiya. I now request the participants to keep themselves muted throughout the lecture. If you have any questions, you can just type them in the chat box. And I now request Dr. Kanika Kishore Saxena ma'am to kindly begin her lecture. Ma'am.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. I would like to thank Shrikant, Gaur, and others, and the Jain Chair for inviting me for this esteemed lecture. And I'm looking forward to a very interactive session with all of you today. I would first like to share my screen. Please let me know if it's visible. Can you see my screen? If you could just.
Yes, ma'am, it's visible and you're
Okay.
audible also. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So, the topic for my presentation for today is Kankali Tila, which is a site in Mathura. And when I'm talking about Kankali Tila, I would like to locate and highlight how it is a very important site associated with Jainism. Now, in the closer map of Mathura, you can on your screen see the Kankali Mount, which is located in the southwest corner of the city of Mathura in Uttar Pradesh. Now, the present images that you have at the site of Kankali Tela clearly reflect a Hindu shrine. And as you say, it's a Kankali Devi Mandir and it is receiving worship, active worship for many years. And it continues even today. My research attempts to understand that the site of Kankali Tila, which is even today popularly named after the Hindu goddess Kankali and has been receiving active worship, has actually overshadowed an ancient Jain presence that the site of Kankali Tila ever enjoyed. And this ancient Jain presence is clearly revealed through archaeology. The site of Kankali Tila has undergone several explorations and excavations from the 19th till the 20th century. And we are looking at the time primarily of the British archaeologists, including Cunningham, Grouse, Furer, who started excavating the site of Kankali Tila and Mathura. And during these excavations, most of the Jain antiquities were found at this site alongside few Buddhist sculptures and pillars also. In the memoirs and in the excavation reports, F.S. Grouse, who was one of the archaeologists, he noticed that one of the Buddhist pillar that was found at this site was eventually draped and dedicated to the goddess Kankali in Hinduism. So, from the 19th century itself, this temple has been receiving active worship. However, despite the present temple receiving Hindu worship, there was no doubt the series of exploration and excavation that were carried on from the 19th century, they continue to reiterate that this is essentially a Jain site. So, for instance, Grouse in his memoir referred to Kankali Tila as a Jaini Tila. Even Cunningham, while he was explorating and excavating Kankali Tila, he argued that this site gives the most satisfactory evidence with regard to Jainism before the first century CE at Mathura. Even after independence, the 20th and the 21st century onwards, Kankali Tila continued to be a Jain site, and the nature of exploration and excavations conducted revealed most of the Jain antiquities. Now, I would reveal through archaeology how there was a very strong Jain presence for nearly 14 centuries at the site of Kankali Tila. So, we have 86 Jain inscriptions which record donation of various kinds of gifts. We have Ayagapatas, we have references to temples, we have discovered a stupa also. So, based on the archaeological evidence at our disposal, my paper would highlight how Jains occupied Kankali Tila for nearly 14th century, and this has now been overshadowed with the presence of the Kankali Devi Mandir, which is receiving active worship. Now, why Kankali Tila out of all sites of Mathura? I have done primarily a major research on various mounds of Mathura, but the significance of Kankali Tila in Mathura is that majority of the Jain sculptures inscriptions have been found at the site of Kankali Tila in Mathura. So there are 86 donative inscriptions, and they record donation of various kinds of Jaina Yagapatas, Tirthankar images, stoops, temples. Now, these donative inscriptions are also revealing the relationship between the monastic order and the laity at Kankali Tila. We have also, through the excavation, discovered the remnants of a Jain stoop. We've also discovered a peculiar gift, that is the Yagapatas and Shilapatas. In addition to that, we have the Jain temples that were found during the course of excavations. And all this clearly established that Jains were occupying this site with functional religious structures. Now, let's look at the primary source of my research, which is inscriptions. Now, at Kankali Tela, we have found inscriptions broadly datable from 2nd century BC to 11th century CE. Now, these inscriptions are in a mixture of Sanskrit and Prakrit, and they're written in Brahmi script. And these are donative inscriptions, meaning they record donation of various kinds of gifts, like Jinnah images, Yagapata, Shilapatas, temples, stoops. Also, we have looked at a majority of
Kindly wait, there's a technical glitch. We'll join again.
I'm very sorry. I think I lost the connection.
Yes, that's okay, ma'am. You can resume.
Yeah, I'll just resume. One second. I'll present my screen again. Is it visible now?
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Okay, so I was talking about the excavation reports, and what is very significant is that we've also discovered the structural remains of stoops and temples associated with Jainism, apart from the images and the sculptural representations of stoops and Ayagapatas. Now, Kankali Tila as a site is revealing the earliest inscription associated with temples, which indicate that the Jains at Kankali Tila were donating gifts and employing temple mode of worship. Also, in addition to temples, we have a continuation of donation of images, tanks, torans, and pillars also. So, what really is the nature of Jain community at Kankali Tila, who is donating from 2nd century BC till 11th century CE? Now, both men and women are donors at Kankali Tila, but clearly women outnumber the men donors. And it's significant to understand this because we need to ponder over the fact that why there is a majority of women donors in order to understand their larger role in context of Jainism. Now, there's a pattern with which the donors introduce themselves. So, both male and female donors are introducing themselves within the kinship and the occupational framework. Some of them are also mentioning their native places. Now, interestingly, the women donors are introducing themselves to their male counterparts, both within the kinship and occupational framework. So, usually they will introduce themselves as daughter, daughter in laws, wife, and mothers, not necessarily in that order. And also, they would mention the profession or occupation of the male members of their family. And very few would actually mention their own occupation. Now, the occupations also help us understand that the Jain community at Kankali Tila was not a homogeneous entity. So, you had the perfumers, you had the jewelers, you had caravan merchants, cotton dealers, the Nartaka, all kind of people donating at Kankali Tila. Now, one of the questions that has to be raised is that was prestige attached to an occupation or was it obligatory for the donors to mention? Also, why were the women donors introducing themselves to the male counterparts? And was mentioning occupation also carrying a prestige? The most closest analysis seems that probably they were to be recorded for posterity, and that is why occupation was deemed to be mentioned in these inscriptions. Now, apart from the laity, Kankali Tila gives us abundant information about the Jain monastic order. And the most peculiar aspect is that the laity is donating at Kankali Tila, but they're donating at the request of the monks and nuns. So this indicates that the Jain monks and nuns were associated with the acts of donation. Now, monks outnumber the nuns in inducing the laity to donate, and also, they are performing three roles as revealed from the inscriptions. They are inducing the laity to donate, they rarely occur as donors, and finally, they are recipients of the gifts because some of the gifts were installed in the vihars and some were even given to the Sangha. Now, the monks and nuns are prefixed with several titles in the inscriptions. So they are referred as Ganin, who perform had a role in admitting the monks to the order. They are also referred as Vachaks, who were well versed in the Jain text. They're also described as disciples of their teachers. And there is a huge reference to several Jain monastic units, which is the Gana, Kula, Shakha, and Sambhog. And finally, very few also mention the native places. With regard to Jainism, there is a detailed list of teachers and pupils in the entire inscriptions that are there at our disposal from Kankali Tila. Now, what does it all reveal? First of all, if you're mentioning the Jain monastic units, that is Gana, which is the largest unit, which is referred as a school, which originated from the teacher. The Kula is a further subdivision of Gana. So, several Kulas would form a Gana. Shakha is where the line of disciples are originating from a particular teacher. And Sambhog is a term which basically is understood as facilitating a common exchange of text, food, and it was the smallest unit of the Sangha. Now, there is a recurrence of several ganas, kulas, and shakhas. So, the Kotiya Gana, the Varan Gana, the Petivamika Kula. Then you have several shakhas like the Veri, the Uchinegri. They keep on occurring, and the Shrigraha and the Shrika Sambhog also. Now, herein we have to understand that the teacher student pair also is mentioned with the same Gana. And the laity to whom they are inducing to make a donation probably also belong to these Ganas or probably also attended the religious services of the respective monks and nuns. Another interesting observation from Kankali Tila is that these Ganas, Kulas, and Shakhas that are mentioned in the Kankali Tila inscriptions, they also occur in a Shwetambar text, Kalpasutra. Now, we are not indicating that these inscription references were based on Kalpasutra. Okay. But probably it was a widespread practice of recording the monastic units. That is why it occurs both in the Kalpasutra and also in the Kankalitila inscriptions. Now, the question then again, as we raised for the laity, why was it necessary to record so many details of the monastic order in the limited space that is available in the inscriptions? So, again, is it obligatory? Was it really obligatory for the laity to be advised by the monks and nuns while they were making donation? So, did there exist in the Jain order a category of certain Vachaks and Ganins that had to be constantly engaging with the laity so that there is a continuation of donations? Overall, this indicates that it was a well established Jain monastic order at Kankali Tila, which was positively interacting with the laity. Apart from the inscriptions, there are also representations of monks and nuns at Kankalitila. The peculiar monks that are mentioned are the Ardhafalak. So it's very important to also study the sculptures. And these Ardhafalaks were a sect of Jain monks which are there sculpturally from 2nd century BC to 3rd century CE. And then nude, except they wear a cholapatta over their left arm. And at Kankalitila, they occur on the pedestals of Jinnah images. They are there also on the Ayagapatas, Shilapatas, and the various stone slabs. Now, moving from the discussion of the monastic order, what evidence do we get of stoop worship at Kankalitila? First is your sculptural evidence, that is representations of Jain stoop. We have excavation report, which has remnants of a brick stoop. We have inscriptional evidence that talks about the Devanirmit stoop at Kankalitila. There's also a literary references and a constant correlation between the literary and the epigraphic reference of the stoop at Kankalitila. Now, on your slide, you see the depiction of the Jain stoop in tympaniums and in torans. We have various sculptural representations of the worship of Jain stoop. On the Ayagapatas also, I'll be talking about Ayagapatas during the course of my presentation. Then a very important evidence is to the excavation report. The excavation reports have preserved the ground plan of the Jain stoop and the majority of Jain sculptures, inscriptions that I've talked about, they were discovered from in and around the stoop area at Kankalitila. Then we have a very significant inscription datable to 3rd century CE, which records a donation of a 20th Tirthankar Munisivrat at the Devanirmit stoop. So it refers to a stoop built by gods, and this is again done at the request of a monk. So probably there was a stoop complex at Kankali Tila where stoops and images were worshipped together. Another very significant mode of worship and popular gift of donation was the Ayagapatas. Now, Ayagapatas are peculiar to Jainism. They are square stone slabs about 90 to 100 centimeters in size, and they are carved with the Jinnah image or with a stoop or with an auspicious symbol. And they are there in Mathura from, and primarily at the site of Kankali Tila from 1st century BC till 3rd century CE. So these are really Jain tablets or slabs of worship. And alongside that, we also have Shilapatas, which were simply stone slabs. Ayagapatas, the term occurs in the inscriptions also. They give us very good information about the origin of the Jinnah image, occurrence really early on these slabs, also popular worship of Tirthankars, also association of the Ardhafalaks and the reasons for the discontinuation. Now, I have divided the Ayagapatas and Chilapatas into four kinds. One is the symbol Ayagapata, which would have an auspicious Jain symbol, like you see a Dharma Chakra. Then there is the Jinnah image Ayagapata. So you can see in the center a small seated image. Then there is a Stupa Yagapata. It's broken, but this is actually a full carving of a stoop. And then you have figural Ayagapata. So this is one of the goddesses in Jainism, which occurs on these Ayagapatas. And also the depiction, as I showed you earlier, of the Ardhafalak monks along with the goddesses also. Now, clearly, Ayagapatas were intended for worship because they record that they were for the worship of the Arhats and they also record invocation to various Tirthankars. Now, the inscriptions record the places of installations. So, there is Arhat Ayatana, the shrines, and also the monasteries. Then, another way of understanding their functions is the context in which they have been found. So many of them have been found in the stoop area and also the temples at Kankali Tila. So they reveal clearly that the Jains at Kankali Tila were worshipping Jinnah images, stoops, and symbols together. They also reveal the significance of the original Jinnah images and its iconography. So earlier you just had simple seated Jinnah images on the Agapatas. They gradually pave way for umbrellas to be carved in the center on the Jinnah image Agapatas. And also, as we all know that the 23rd Tirthankar Parshavanath is carved with snake canopy, you also have that being visible on the Yagapatas fairly early from the 1st century CE itself. Then Ardhafalak are also seen flanking the Parshavanath image in the center and they also occur in full form on the Ayagapatas. Now, these Ayagapatas are not surfacing at Kankali Tila after 3rd century CE. In fact, they are reused and they're carved into images. Now, usually you would discard a sacred object after it is being broken. However, Ayagapatas are reused and they are recarved into images and then again utilized as objects of worship. So there is no example after 3rd century CE. So probably, we are looking at them paving way for the Jinnah images that were carved in round and donated in large numbers at Kankali Tila. So these seated Jinnah images paved way for independent images in the round. So you have seated images, you had Sarvadobhadrika, and this all reveals that the Jains were worshipping images very early. And there are three forms that are noticeable. One is, as you see, the standing Jinnah image of Neminath. You have seated images like of Parshavanath. You have Sarvatobhadrika, that is on the four sides, you would have the Tirthankars. And interestingly, apart from these images, you also have Saraswati image from Kankali Tila. And although we have Saraswati being associated with Hinduism, it's occurring the first literary evidence is Rig Veda, but the sculptural evidence of a Saraswati image is actually of Jain context from Kankali Tila. So overall, the donation of Jinnah images at Kankali Tila revealed that they were actively indulging in image worship and worshipping the Tirthankars. And this is a continued practice from early historical till early medieval, and there is a pinnacle from 1st to the 4th century. The popular worship of various Tirthankars is also known from the inscription. So clearly, we know that Mahavir and Parshvanath were popularly worshipped, but we also have references to Sambhavnath, Sumatinath, Neminath, and Shantinath. All these Tirthankars were also worshipped. Now, another thing that the Jinnah images reveal is that they are colossal, they're huge in size. So that also indicates that the temples or the shrines where they were housed were also huge and magnificent in nature. Then finally, we also have the remnants of temples at Ankalitira, which we know through the excavation reports. Now, interestingly, the excavation reports at Kankalitira that were conducted during the British time talks about two temples that were discovered. And the excavation reports reiterate that the sculptures have been found in and around the temple and the stoop area. Now we have a clear evidence with regard to inscriptions that they were donating Toran for a temple as early as 2nd century BC, and they were donating complete temples from 1st century CE itself. And the evidence that I've discussed till now clearly also establishes that images of Yagapatas, Shilapatas were installed in temples only. Now, from the temples, we can also come to a larger question that who were the Jains at Kankali Chila? Were they Shwetambar or were they Digambar? Now, I've attempted to answer that, and these terms enter the Jain vocabulary fairly late. While we do have a concrete Shwetambar Sangha presence from two early medieval inscriptions datable to 981 and 1077 CE, the term Digambar does not occur. Though Führer, who was one of the primary excavators of Kankali Tila, does mention a Digambar temple. However, his reports were criticized because they were not mentioning each detail of the sculpture from where it was found, so it was difficult to accept. We're not denying the Gambar presence, but when it comes to inscriptional availability of the term, that we are lacking with regard to Kankali Tila. So, coming to my final conclusion about the site of Kankali Tila, clearly, there is abundant evidence of Jainism in the religious landscape of Kankalitila in the form of Jinnah images, Ayagapatas, Shilapatas, and the numerous donative inscriptions from 2nd century BC till 11th century CE. Now, the temple mode of worship was also employed very early. The earliest gifts are donated and associated with temples. Images are the most popular objects of donation. Ayagapatas are another popularly donated objects, but they were peculiar to Jainism. However, if we compare Ayagapatas and images, clearly they never reached a very high level of popularity with the masses in comparison to the images. Both Ayagapatas and Shilapatas reveal that Kankali Tila witnessed worship of various Tirthankars from Rishabhnath to Vardhamanan to Parshvanath. And if we integrate the analysis, clearly the two Tirthankars which are more popular are 23rd and 24th Tirthankars, whereas other Tirthankars like Sumatinath, Shantinath have also been worshipped at Kankali Tila. In addition to that, we also need to understand that the donation of the Saraswati image is very significant with regard to the Jain context. Now, Kankali Tila also reveals the larger question about the origins of the images. Usually, whenever we understand the origin of image, Buddhism is one of the religious traditions we look at, and the origin of the Jinnah images is relatively neglected. In this context, the occurrence of Jinnah images as early as 1st century BC CE pushes the origin of image worship in Jainism fairly early. Also, with regard to stoop, we usually locate Buddhist parallels. However, the Jains at Kankali Tila were clearly worshipping the stoop, and there is evidence of the remnant of a stoop structure and also the representations of the stoops on Ayagapatas
Ma'am, you're not audible.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, now you're
Okay.
audible, ma'am.
So just two more slides. Are my slides visible? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, ma'am, they are visible.
So clearly, the Jains were occupying this site from early historical to early medieval period, and this establishes Kankali Tila as a very important religious center of the Jains. However, as I take you to the present of Kankali Tila, this site thriving with functional religious structures for nearly 14th century, clearly revealing it is a very significant Jain site. Presently, if you visit the site, there is just one board stating a protected monument and excavated site installed here by the Archaeological Survey of India. Underneath it lies the Jain presence for nearly 14th century, which has been revealed by archaeology and which is unanswered by this board. Even the local population are not aware about the Jain presence at this site. And my paper aims to establish how this site enjoyed a continued Jain presence from the ancient times till the early medieval period. Thank you so much. I
Thank you
would,
very much, ma'am.
yeah, I would just stop sharing my screen. Yeah. Thank you so much for your
Yeah.
patience. Yeah.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for this brisk lecture and overview of the Jain stupa site of Kankali Tila, where you not just only covered the data related to the site, but also covered a large part of the interpretation of how material culture can actually help us to understand the societal dynamics, along with the sectarian dynamics that you tried to answer through your particular presentation. As I had already mentioned in the chat box, that questions are to be typed in the chat box. We will not allow people to unmute themselves. There are few questions. So one of the question is, what were the possible factors of discontinuation of stupa worship in Jainism?
Okay. Now, when I talk about stoop worship in Jainism, in fact, recently there have also been a discussion of the worship of relic stoops by Flogel that have been recently coming to light. However, there is a discontinuation because the nature of stoop worship is very different in Buddhism and Jainism. With regard to Jainism, these stoops were largely built in the memory of the Tirthankars. Especially if I talk about the site of Kankali Tila, they are not actual relic stoops which you have in Buddhism. And that is one of the reasons why there is more popularity of image worship of the Tirthankars that continued in Jainism in comparison to the stoop worship that was more popular in Buddhism. However, by the later times and the recent studies, we do have Flogel's evidence of even relic stoops being worshipped, and recently they have been acquiring that, but it was discontinued primarily because of this reason, and earlier relic worship was not there in Jainism.
Thank you, ma'am. There are a few more questions. So the first question by Swati Puglia is the concept of equity between nuns and monks found in the inscriptions? Two, do female donors have any active role in the religious site after making a donation?
Okay. Now, when it comes to the equity between Jain monks and nuns, yes, there is equity as both are inducing and persuading the laity to donate. However, monks are outnumbering the nuns. And when they are inducing the laity to donate, you would also have that pattern that while the monks can induce the male disciples or the male laity, the nuns are only inducing the female laity to donate at Kankali Tila. So there is not complete equity also, but the fact that you have the same epithets being used for both is a positive reflection of the Jain monastic order of that time. The second question, that is the female donors. Yes, I would really, my research really reveals, and I agree to that, that definitely the Jain women were actively performing religious activities. And the fact that though they are introducing themselves to their male counterparts, yet you have their name on the inscription. They are introducing themselves, they have their names recorded in the inscription. That in itself is a bigger picture to say that they were performing active roles. In addition to that, very few of them. One example, we also have a Ganika who donates an Ayaga Pata at Mathura. So few of them are even mentioning their own profession, and that too of a Ganika. That means they were even allowed in the Jain monastic order. So, yes, I would say that they were positively performing their religious services and donating.
Thank you very much, ma'am. The next question is, what are the architectural elements seen in a Jain stupa and how different are they in comparison to a Buddhist one?
Now, architectural elements, usually the Jain stups are three-tiered. Okay. Whereas the Buddhist stups are more heavily ornamented and the tiers could be four also. But at Kankali Tila, most of the stups that we have found are three-tiered, and they would usually have these celestial beings carrying garlands over them. Another difference is, as I said earlier, the difference in the relic. These stups are built in the memory of the Tirthankars, whereas the Buddhist stups are essentially relic in nature. They would carry the hair of the Buddha, a nail, a bone, a relic of a Buddhist monk or Buddha also.
Thank you, ma'am. Rajneesh Kumarji is asking, any legend behind the name Kankali Tila?
It is actually after the Kankali goddess only. That's how it got popular. And that is also being recorded by the archaeologist that we had. So because of the shrine receiving, that's why I started with the images of the Kankali Devi Mandir, that it acquired the popularity, because the earliest report that we have of this place being Kankali Tila is by Alexander Cunningham, who goes to the site, but he doesn't find it worth excavating also. So he just explores and he records the temple being there, and that is how the site is referred as Kankali Tila.
Thank you, ma'am. Another question is whether any other Jain stupas exist.
Now, when it comes to the remnants of a Jain stup, it is only Kankali Tila that I found. While I was doing my research also, I could not come across any Jain stup remnants being discovered in any site of the Indian subcontinent. However, I'm not denying, because we found Ayaga Patas, an object similar to the Ayaga Patas at Koshambi also. So therein the sculptural representations of the stoop would have been there, but the Jain stoop remnants that have been recorded in the excavation reports are from the site of Kankali Tila alone.
Ma'am, what about the site of Vaddamanu?
In Deccan, which you're talking about? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I would not have great detail of knowledge about that. My area was primarily north. If that has a reference, please enlighten me. I would love to research and draw a comparison related to that.
Okay. The next question is, could you please suggest some readings on Jain iconography? So I guess there's some enthusiastic student who's interested in Jain iconography.
UP Shah, the most important reading I always go by, and I have really love reading, very well explained. The most important reading I would say is UP Shah's, the main text for Jain iconography.
Yes, absolutely. Another question is, do we find any evidence of syncretism between Hinduism and Jainism at the site?
Yes, we do find. And with regard to Jainism, the standing image of Neminath I showed to you is actually flanked by Krishna and Balaram. And Neminath, as we all know in Jain tradition also, they're referred as the nephews, Krishna and Balaram. And Mathura primarily being a site associated with Krishna worship. So clearly, there was an association by the Jains also to syncretically absorb the Krishna elements. within their iconography as well. And Neminath is one of the clearest examples of that.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Uh, the next question is: Are Ayagapata proof of early symbol worship in Jainism, and what was the time of the construction of the stupa?
Yeah. See, Ayagapata definitely reveal both symbol and image worship, because we have not only the worship of Jain auspicious symbols, we have images also. Now, the timing of the Ayagapatas are from 1st century CE till 4th century CE. They're discontinued after that. Roughly after 3rd, 4th century CE, we have very few examples. Now, when it comes to the timing of the stoop that we are looking at, there are different dates that are there. Sculpturally, there is visibility of the stoop from 1st century BC, but the remnants of the stoop, which is recorded in the excavation reports, is datable to 4th or 3rd century BCE. That the excavator recorded. There was the brick lining only that we had discovered.
Thank you, ma'am. Another question. Based on epigraphical records, that is donations and record of Ayatan, and visual records, that is depiction of Ardhafalaks on Ayagapata and also on the narrative panels, how do you see the monastic presence at the site, especially in terms of their settled pattern, vis-a-vis vow of itinerancy?
Yeah. See, I would say that there is a very well established Jain monastic order. Now, I'm not denying, because I've done a comparative study. I have also looked at Buddhism at the site. I've also looked at Yaksha Naga. I've looked at Hinduism also. But though, if I draw a comparison in the monastic orders, there is the Buddhist inscriptions also flooded with the names of monks and nuns. But with regard to Jainism, the kind of details they are providing about their monastic order, the epithets that are used, the ganas, the kulas, and shakhas that are used, clearly reveal that the Jains were very much there at Kankali Tila. However, the only clinching evidence that's lacking is that we have not discovered structural remains of monasteries, and there are less references to monasteries in inscriptional terms also. Whereas in comparison to Buddhism, there are a lot of references to vihars also, where they're recording. With regard to Jainism, we just have one. But the names of monks and nuns, whether they were natives of Mathura or Kankali Tila, or were Kankali Tila really a pilgrimage center where people from different areas, different Jain monks and nuns were coming to donate. So there's a very strong Jain monastic presence. I would not deny that at Kankali Tila.
Thank you, ma'am. Another participant is asking, most of the images are in Digambar form. What does it suggest?
See, one has to, you all are well versed, you're students of Jain history primarily. Most of the images are nude for a very long time. And nudity as a factor dividing Shwetambar and Digambars sculpturally enter fairly late, except that one image from Akota in Gujarat, which is 5th century CE. Apart from that, we do not get concrete evidence. So, in fact, if you read the excavation reports, the reason why the archaeologists were jumping onto a very strong Digambar presence is because all the images were nude. So even if when I have an inscriptional evidence of a Shwetambar presence, still we are looking at the images largely being nude. So sectarianism would have entered the Jain vocabulary by early medieval period, but this was not extended to carving clothes to the Tirthankar images. That was missing, and that entered fairly late.
Thank you, ma'am, for answering this very disputable question. Another question is, I could not. There's a participant who's saying that he could not see clearly the image of Saraswati. What are the attributes based on which it is associated with Saraswati? The seating position of the same is not the same as one of the Lajja Gauri.
Yes, we have the inscriptional reference to Saraswati in the image. So there is no doubt. Though the sculpturally, the crouched position, the way the image is shown is very similar to Lajja Gauri, but epigraphic reference to Saraswati is there. That is why we are confident it's a Saraswati image. And it refers to the Jain Ganas, Kulas, and Shakhas. So clearly it's a donation by the Jain community.
Thank you. Shrikant sir has asked a question. He would like to know any epigraphic evidence to understand the presence of Buddhist monasteries in the vicinity of Kankali Tila during the same time period.
Yes, sir, we do have. We have the Jamalpur Mound, the Bhuteshwar Mound, which is located close to Kankali Chila, and the earliest, in fact, Buddhist inscriptions. They record installations in monasteries or vihars also. But what is lacking with regard to the entire site of Mathura is that we have unearthed very few structural remains. So we do not have structural remains of Buddhist monasteries also, but we have inscriptional references to Buddhist monasteries clearly.
Thank you. I'm very happy that we are having all this like good discussion by the participant side. One of the participants says that, ma'am, I read your article about Ayak Pata. So of course they have done a little bit of homework. He wishes to ask till what time the stupa existed at Kankalitela.
See, the stoop existed Kankali Tila. I have not incorporated literary evidence herein because my paper primarily was in archaeology, but it goes up till the time of the 14th century, where it is mentioned as the Devanirmit Stoop at Kankali Tila in the text of Vivid Tirtha Kalpa, which is datable to 14th century CE. So we have it continuing by the late medieval period also.
Thank you. Another question. Can you shed more light on archaeological remains of the Chaitya? Were they also upsidal, like at many early Buddhist monastic sites? And how to place Chaitya in terms of the chronological layers of the site?
Yeah. Thank you, Anchit, for your question. And when it comes to the Chaitya, we do not have, a clear inscriptional evidence to Chaitya. Now, interestingly, at Kankali Tila, we have other forms that are noticeable. So, if you're looking at archaeological remnants, they are more clearly of the remnants of the temples and of the stup, and not necessarily of the Chaitya, which is more there in the Buddhist context, which is missing with regard to Kankali Tila at Jainism. So, even if I have to place it chronologically in the layering of Kankali Tila, it is difficult for me to do so because the inscription evidence is lacking, and so is the structural presence also of this.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Another participant is asking, ma'am, can you give more light on the paradigm shift of Kankali Tila? I mean, how it transformed from being a Jain space to being a Devi temple in present context.
Yeah. Okay. When the Britishers were actually archaeologically, they were excavating, exploring. At that time, the general population at Mathura was more of the Hindus because in that time, it had completely been draped into Krishna worship and more of Hindu cults were visible on site. Now, one of the reports clearly mentioned that while they were excavating, they found a pillar, a carved pillar, and the entire history of Mathura has been that most of the images that were found. In fact, I didn't have time to talk about the curator Pandit Radhakrishna, who discovered most of the Buddhist and Jain images which were worshipped as Vishnu images in the houses. And also another site at Mathura, you would be aware, Sonk. It's near the city of Mathura. Now, there they had found a Naga image. Now, there is a belief in the villages that जो भी surface पे मिलता है, whatever they found on the ground, even before you start excavating, actually belongs to them. And they have full right to worship it the form they want to. So, in my book, I have carried the image of Chamunda Devi. That is the actually there. It's a clear Naga sculpture. You can see the snake canopy fangs also, but they have painted that sculpture with orange color, pasted eyes on it, and it also receives active worship as Chamunda Devi. So something similar happened with Kankali Devi Mandir also, because the community was no longer Jain there by the time they were excavating. So they found this pillar and they constructed it. Most of the people who were patronizing the site at this time were Hindus, and they draped it in the form of a Kankali Devi Mandir. So people are actually not aware that sorry, this site had a very strong Jain presence also, but I'm still grateful to ASI for at least installing that board, which is a very strong remnant of how important this site is for Jainism also.
Thank you, ma'am. One of the participant is asking which art style was used to make these Jain images that you have shown during the lecture.
It's a typical Mathura school of art. In red sandstone, stiff images in Kayotsargamurga, Abhemudra, all of that, a typical Mathura school of sculpture that is being reflected in carving of these images.
Thank you. Another participant is asking what does the inscription have the name of the place mentioned as?
Yes, the inscriptions do not mention all the native places and the names, but we do record the places like Mathura in one of the inscriptions, which is not there from the site of Kankali Tila. Then there are native places like Abhisar that the monks are talking, they belong to such places, and other regions are unidentified.
Thank you, ma'am. Another question is can you please throw some light on the Mathur Sangha?
Mathura Sangha? Yeah,
Yeah, the
this is
Mathur Sangha.
Mathura Sangha. About the Mathura Sangha, I would say the term Sangha is there in the early medieval inscriptions, and that is with regard to the Shwetambar Sangha at Mathura. So we do have evidence in the early medieval period, that is the two inscriptions from 981 to 1077 CE, the two inscriptions which refer to a Shwetambar Sangha existing and donating. Apart from that, we have the complete, as I've shown during the course of my presentation, the entire repertoire of evidence related to the monks, nuns, and the various monastic units that occur at Mathura apart from the sculptural representation.
Thank you, ma'am. One of the last questions is, ma'am, what kind of artistic divergence can we see in Jain art in the context of ancient and modern period?
I would say a lot of divergence because out of my interest, I'm not a Jain, but because I've researched so much on Jain, I do go to the temples and I do see. With regard to, if I compare the ancient Mathura school of art, I would broadly talk about that. There is more sort of a stiffness, muscularity in carving of the images. Like if I go, and I've been to the Dilwara temples also, and fortunately, through the Dilwara temples, we got an entry at night also therein. And therein, clearly, there is a sectarian division that is visible. And also, there is the nature of the stone with which they are carved being very smooth and polished, unlike the spotted red sandstone that you see from Mathura. Also, the mode of worship. Like in Dilwara temples, they were worshipping it with the help of actually looking at the reflection of the image, okay, with the help of a darpan or a mirror, but which is actually not true. And as I see many Jains actually entering and worshipping, I just like observing also, it's very similar to what you have in the Hindu temples also. So there is a lot of give and take therein. Whereas when it comes to the ancient worship, we have not found much evidence of, say, like the Yaksha images had a lot of vermilion being put on the images. So probably during that time, there was less of those things being used in the ancient period. Thank you so much for all the questions. I have also learned a lot. And I'm very happy with so many questions, and it is giving me a lot of food for thought.
Ma'am, actually, 110 participants are completely joined during your lecture. And
Thank you.
even now, we have 84 participants live with us. There is a participant who is asking, can you please suggest some texts on Jain archaeology? It seems that she is interested in the field of Jain archaeology.
Jain archaeology. Text in particular, I would say if you're interested, I mean, my favorite would always be UP Shah, that goes without saying. But apart from that, if you want to read, I would say read the excavation reports also. They talk at length, the earlier archaeologists. Then the literary tradition discussion, I would say, is very good when it comes to scholars like Padmanabh Jaini, Paul Dundas, who touches upon this. And apart from that, also VK Sharma has compiled a lot of details about Jain archaeology being there throughout the Indian subcontinent. AK Chatterjee is also another very important reading on history of Jainism if you're interested with regard to archaeology and literary evidence.
Thank you very much, ma'am. One last question from my personal side.
Absolutely.
As a person who is interested in public archaeology, I would like to ask what is the further scope for development of, say, heritage tourism at the site of Kankali Tila, how it can be brought more in connection with the commoners so that people also become aware of the kind of heritage and the vast diversity of heritage that Jainism has created for this nation.
I would really like to join my hands with you in that because I mean, I think it's very, very important that we also tell the people about the history of their site. With Mathura, because it has been my area of PhD when I used to go when I was young as a student, also, people are not even aware about the religious diversity at the site. You know, even if you want to go there, people would first say you have to first go to the mandir. That's the thing. So I think if for Kankali Tila alone we have to develop, apart from that board, I think what we actually need is installation. There are huge amount of sculptures in the reserve collection of Mathura Museum and even at the Lucknow Museum because the Kankali Tila sculptures they were large in number and they were transferred to Lucknow. So if we could be allotted an area by ASI near the Kankali Devi Mandir and actually try and showcase the past and present of how beautifully the site was draped in Jainism while this is receiving active worship in the form of Hinduism, and how there was a very good tolerance during that time also. Something that we could highlight and not only show that the religious traditions were not able to survive together. In fact, Mathura gives good examples. Sonk also, you have a Naga temple and a Matraka temple located very close to each other. So I think that board which they have given us, if something more could be built around that, and that's very important for heritage tourism. And there's a Jain museum also at Mathura, which very few people visit and know. And the colossal images that I'm talking about, and the Negamesh images, they are part of that Jain museum, which was actually the earlier old Mathura museum. So they have labeled it as a Jain museum. The problem is there is not enough sensitization about it. So I was interested because I was doing my research. So I paved my way through those museums. Common people are not aware, so we definitely need to work on the heritage tourism associated with Jainism there.
Thank you very much, ma'am. That very well sums up the spirit of archaeology and what actually researchers are doing for the society and for the academics. I now request Gurvendra Kushwaha, a research fellow at Deccan College, to kindly propose a vote of thanks.
Yes. Respected Chair, esteemed Speaker, distinguished faculty members, dear colleagues and students, it is an honor to extend a heartfelt vote of thanks to the conclusion of today's insightful lecture on Jain heritage on the topic Kankali Tila, past and present, delivered as the part of Professor H.D. Sankalia Mantri lecture series. So, first and foremost, I extend my deepest gratitude to our esteemed speaker, Dr. Kanika Kishore Saxena ma'am, for an engaging and enlightening session. I also express my sincere thanks to Dr. Snitra Pandey sir, Director ISJS, Dr. Narendra Bhandari sir, President of Jain Academy of Scholars, Dr. Renuka Porwal, Dr. Rupesh Madkar, Dr. Arvind Sontakke sir, Dr. Gyaneshwari Hazare, Dr. Sonali Shah, Dr. Pragya Jain, Dr. Manisha Puranik Madam, Narendra Parson, Shailendra Jain, Vinit Gaware, and Anchit Jain. With this, we conclude today's session, and I look forward to more such intellectual and enriching lectures in future. So, thank you, everyone. Thank you once again. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for patiently listening and for all the questions. I also learned a lot to this interactive section. Thank you so much, everyone, to the Gen Chair, all the esteemed faculty which I'm seeing on the board, and also all the students, Shrikant sir, all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you, everyone.